Welcome, we're continuing our journey through Daniel chapter 11, and in this video we'll be working through verses 9 to 12. Now just a bit of a brief recap. So we have these two kingdoms, the Ptolemaic in the south and the Seleucid in the north. And after the founding monarchs of these empires die, they begin to have a series of conflicts with each other, which are known as the Syrian Wars. In our last video, we spoke about the Third Syrian War, in which Ptolemy III is able to push his border into the Seleucid Empire. Let's now zoom in and pick up straight after these events. In verse 9, we read, "For some years he, the king of the south, shall refrain from attacking the king of the north. Then the latter shall invade the realm of the king of the south, but will return to his own land." Now, verse 9 is simply telling us that the king of the north attempts to regain some of his lost land, but is unsuccessful. There's not a lot of historical detail given here. But we do know that during this time period, we have a change in leadership. In the south, Ptolemy III is succeeded by his son, Ptolemy IV. In the north, things are slightly more complicated because Seleucus II has two sons, Seleucus III and Antiochus III, who will be known as Antiochus the Great. Appian tells us, "After Seleucus II, his two sons, Seleucus III and Antiochus III the Great, succeeded in the order of their age. As Seleucus III was sickly and poor and unable to command the obedience of the army, he was poisoned by a court conspiracy in the second year of his reign. His brother was Antiochus III the Great, who went to war with the Romans, of whom I have written above. He reigned 37 years. So Seleucus' sons reign one after each other, with the eldest Seleucus III first taking the throne. As Appian tells us, Seleucus is not a competent leader. He was sickly and poor, unable to command the obedience of the army, and he will be eventually assassinated, poisoned by a court conspiracy, in just the second year of his reign. In comparison, his younger brother will earn himself the title of Antiochus the Great, and he will reign for 37 years. Now, the reason why it's important that we talk about both the sons of Seleucus II is because in verse 10 of Daniel, we read the following about Seleucus II. Quote, "His sons shall wage war and assemble a multitude of great forces which shall advance like a flood and pass through, and again shall carry the war as far as his fortress." End quote. On this verse, Newsom in her commentary writes the following. The author of Daniel uses the collective term his sons to merge the reign of Seleucus III Soter with that of his much more impressive brother Antiochus III the Great. Seleucus III's nickname Thunderbolt was given in irony. He was an impetuous and ineffectual commander who was soon assassinated by his own troops. So the eldest son Seleucus III reigns first, and while he did wage some war with his neighbors, he was largely unsuccessful. The same, however, cannot be said about his brother. Antiochus III was extremely successful in battle. Therefore, verse 10 is primarily referring to the exploits of the younger brother Antiochus III. He is the one who truly wages war and assembles a multitude of great forces which shall advance like a flood and pass through. This description of a war in verse 10 is referring to the Fourth Syrian War, which is initiated by Antiochus III, and in this war he recaptures Judea for the Seleucid Empire. Ptolemy IV, however, retaliates to this invasion. In verse 11 we read, "Then in a rage the king of the south will rally against the vast forces assembled by the king of the north and will defeat them." And we know that Ptolemy IV is successful in pushing back Antiochus because at the Battle of Raphia, he's able to recapture the lost land. Goldingay writes the following, "Antiochus III attempted to turn the tide of aggressive power between the Seleucids and the Ptolemies beginning in 219 by recapturing Seleucia. He invaded Palestine and conquered a large part of it, but the southern king, Ptolemy IV, in due course sent an army to engage with Antiochus III at Raphia, the Egyptian stronghold on the border with Palestine in 217. End quote. We read about the Fourth Syrian War and the Battle of Raphia in the writings of Polybius, who writes the following. "Such was the result of the Battle of Raphia, fought by the kings for the possession of Cilicia, Syria. After paying the last honors to the dead, Antiochus returned to his own kingdom with his army, and Ptolemy took without resistance Raphia and the other towns." Now we continue to read in verse 12, "After the enemy army is swept away, the king of the south will be filled with pride and will execute many thousands of his enemies, but his success will be short-lived. Now, this verse tells us that even though Ptolemy is initially victorious, it adds, but this success will be short-lived. Now, this is most likely referring to the fact that after the Battle of Raphia, there is an Egyptian revolt against the kingship of Ptolemy IV. We read about this in Polybius, who writes the following. Ptolemy, however, immediately after these events became involved in a war with his Egyptian subjects. For in arming them for his campaign against Antiochus, he had taken a step which, while it served his immediate purpose sufficiently well, proved eventually disastrous. Elated with their victory at Raphia, they refused any longer to receive orders from the king, but looked out for a leader to represent them, on the ground that they were quite able to maintain their independence. And this they succeeded in doing before very long. End quote. So immediately after the Battle of Raphia, the Ptolemaic Empire descends into chaos, with the Egyptian people revolting against their king. During this time, Ptolemy IV dies in unclear circumstances, but is most likely assassinated, and he's replaced by his 6-year-old son, Ptolemy V. Newsom writes the following about these events. The patterns described by verse 12 is thus apt. The overconfidence and complacency resulting from the victory at Raphia was soon followed by a near collapse of the Ptolemaic state. Ptolemy's successor, Ptolemy V Epiphanes, was a child of 6, and his accession to the throne was an occasion for political murders and coups. End quote. Now that brings an end to our analysis of verses 9 to 12. But knowing all of this history puts us in a really great position to learn about the most famous archaeological discovery in Egypt, and that is none other than the Rosetta Stone, which contains the Memphis Decree. It was made during the reign of Ptolemy V, this child king, and the decree addresses the rebellion of the Egyptian people during this time. So my next video is going to be a bit of a detour, something a bit different to what we're used to. It's going to be all about the Rosetta Stone and what it's all about. Hopefully you join me for it. I think you'll find it interesting. After that video, we'll get back to our regular programming. As always, if you're enjoying these videos, your support would be greatly appreciated. So please consider supporting me on Patreon. Find the link in the description below. If donating isn't something you're able to do, it's still tremendously helpful if you hit that like button and leave a comment. Finally, make sure that you're subscribed to get my next video. Thank you for watching until the end, and as always, I will see you in the next one.